This 12-inch block is called Wild Goose Chase. It has flying geese and squares and a few triangles in it. Here is the diagram, and your flying geese alternative is listed here, where you can cut your squares and make your no-waste flying geese instead of cutting these or using the AccuQuilt, whichever method you like best. I'm going to start going over all of these cutting instructions for people who are not familiar with rotary cutting or new quilters. So the first one is the A patch, and it's a 4-inch finished half square triangle. And we'll take one piece of fabric, a square, that's 4 7/8 inches square, and cut it in half once diagonally. And we need 4 patches. So we'll need 2 of these squares, cut both of them in half diagonally for our 4 patches. And here are these patches here. So we have 2 here and 2 here. This was a square, we cut it in half once diagonally, and we have our 4 patches. The next one is similar, but it's smaller. It's a 2-inch finished half square triangle, and we cut these squares 2 7/8 inches. We need 16 patches of the background and 8 patches of the accent fabric. So for the background, we'll have to cut 8 squares and cut each one of those in half. For the accent fabric, we'll have to cut 4 squares and cut each of those in half diagonally. Here are the squares here, the 16 background, here's the square cut in half, and here are the 8 accent fabrics of square cut in half. And next we have 2-inch finished square for the C patch. So we're going to cut our square 2 1/2 inches, and we need 4 of those. So just cut 4 squares at 2 1/2 inches. And here are the 4 squares cut 2 1/2 inches. Patch D is a 1/4 square triangle that's 4-inch finished. And that means we're going to cut a square that's 5 1/4 inches, and we're going to cut it in half diagonally twice. So there are 4 triangles, and that's why it's called a 1/4 square triangle. Now here we need 8 patches, so that means we have to cut 2 of these at 5 1/4, cut both of them in half twice diagonally, and we'll have our 8 patches. Here are the 1/4 square triangles here, so you can see how we took a square and we cut it in half diagonally twice to get 4 pieces. Now all of these pieces I cut with the AccuQuilt, so all of the points are cut off. But if you are rotary cutting, you will have points here, but they'll look the same. And finally, the last piece is a 4-inch finished square. We just need 1, and we're going to cut 4 1/2 inches by 4 1/2 inches. And here is our 4 1/2 inch cut square. If you have an AccuQuilt, all of these AccuQuilt dies that you can use for these patches are listed on here as well. So you can rotary cut or you can use your AccuQuilt. The next thing we're going to do is make our flying geese, and we have 8 of these units, and then we have 4 of these corner units that we're going to piece. So I'm going to piece all of those now. When you sew your half square triangles, you're going to sew one side of the triangle on first and then press it, because you want it to be nice and flat when you sew your other side on. So this side has been sewn and pressed, and then this second side is sewn now, and then this will be pressed open. This is what it looks like on the back. So that way it lays nice and flat. And if you see this little place here where this point is right here, that should be 1/4 inch from here to the edge. So as you're sewing this together into the block, you'll want to pay attention and put this on top so you can see where your needle is going. You want it to go right at this point, so you'll have a nice pretty point on the other side. Now this other unit can be very tricky. Here is what you're looking for. The best way to do this is to lay the pieces out as you see it in this picture here. Then we're going to sew the 2 triangles on the sides of the square. And the way you know you've got it right is these triangles, the long part of the triangle will go against the long part of this triangle. So these will actually go like this, and then your square just scoots into here. And for when you piece these, you'll lay them out and then pick up the pieces, and you'll piece one square, one triangle on the side of the square first, then press it so it's nice and flat. And then this one has the second one pieced, and it's just nice and flat over the seam. And now we'll press this seam open, and this is what you'll have. And they should match, and then we'll sew this together. When you sew this section to this triangle, so you have actually two triangles here, if you have a little nub sticking up here, then just cut it off. It's kind of tiny, but just snip it off. And then you're going to flip it over and sew with this part to the top. And I want to show you. And we have our little point right here again, which should be 1/4 inch from here to the edge of the fabric. And you'll want to stitch your 1/4 inch and have this on top and stitch right there at that point, so you'll have a really pretty point. Here's what it looks like stitched. You can see the stitching coming down, and it just barely touches that point here and keeps going. And so when you open it up, there's your point, and it'll look even better once it's pressed. That's what you want. And here it is pressed open. I wanted to add something about when you stitch your 1/4 inch and you're aiming for this point on this and on the flying geese, or anything that you're trying to sew a seam line right up against a point. If you are stitching a 1/4 inch and you come to this point and it's out of the 1/4 inch. If it's too far away or too close to the 1/4 inch, and if it's not much, maybe 2-3 threads, then go ahead and just aim for that point. Don't worry about the seam allowance there. So if you start up here and you start at your 1/4 inch, you're aiming for this point here. And you go directly to that point, and don't worry if the seam allowance is off slightly. Now, if you're off a whole bunch, then that's going to affect the block. It won't lay flat. So something else is wrong. But if it's just a little bit, don't worry about it. And then once you get to this point, then try to get to your 1/4 inch once you reach this other end of the piece. Because I'm not perfect. My 1/4 inch is sometimes not perfect, or a lot of times not perfect, but that's the way that I get these points. People say that my piecing is so good. This is why, because I'm not so concerned that I always have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You don't want to get sloppy. You don't want to just go for it where you're distorting the block or the unit. But if you just have to go over a little bit to get that point, then just do it. And you're the only judge of that. So this is how I do it. Now we'll piece the block. Thanks for watching.